Welcome to the space where we break down barriers and perceptions about a career in law by talking to the talented people of Gowling WLG. I'm Emma Dennis, Diversity, Inclusion and Wellbeing Senior Manager at Gowling WLG, so join me as we get to dive under the surface and understand the diverse experiences and perspectives of our people, how they've got to where they are and what they wish they'd known.
Today I'm joined by Sunil Kakkad, retired partner and now consultant at Gowling WLG. Sunil is also part of the UK leadership team and a member of Gowling WLG's international board. Hi Sunil, thanks for being here today. It's really good to have you. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you, Emma, and thank you very much for inviting me to share my experience with you.
Thank you. I've got a whole host of questions for you because I know you've had a really long and interesting career. So I wanted to start today by asking you about sort of your early years and your career, I guess the start of your career and what led to the start of your career. So I know that you came to the UK back in the 70s.
Interestingly, I came to England as part of the expulsion of Asians from Uganda in 1972, and the vast majority, and I would say probably 90% of the Asians who settled in the UK were either British citizens or had a right to live in the UK, but the term refugee was universally applied to them. So I think it's correct to say that I came here as a refugee in the broadest sense of the word, because Britain was generous enough to take us all in and give us the start in life that we all had. But it wasn't a refugee in the traditional sense. If you look at what's happening today in Europe and in the Middle East. I suppose maybe the best place to start is why law, and I haven't got a simple answer for it, because actually law was not my chosen profession in the sense that I didn't choose that I should become a lawyer. It was chosen for me more than anything by my grandfather, who felt that he needed a lawyer in the family, and I don't know why, because this is my paternal grandfather. Everyone on my mother's side is a doctor, and she never harbored any ambitions that either I or my brother should become doctors or enter the medical profession. So I suppose I stumbled into it largely because of an overwhelming expectation that that is what I should do. And I don't think I had ever thought of an alternative career until I qualified as a lawyer. So having qualified as a lawyer, that's what I've done for the last 40 plus years. I have no regrets about it, because actually it's been, from my perspective, both a stimulating as well as a rewarding profession to be in. Rewarding in the sense of it's constantly challenging. The work that I do, I trained as a corporate lawyer and continued to practice as a corporate lawyer until I retired as a partner last year, still chair our corporate group. And the work that we do is challenging. It's very, very time sensitive. So you're really living by the seat of your pants. Clients constantly demand solutions that are not obvious, and you have to find them. And the pace at which we do things now is very different from when I started back in the 80s. So that sort of broadly, it wasn't a career choice as much as a path that had been chosen for me. The irony is that my grandfather, who was very, very keen that I should become a lawyer, was disappointed when I told him that I was becoming a lawyer, because I had decided to become a solicitor. Yeah. And in his mind, lawyers were people who wore gowns and wigs and appeared in court. Yeah. And he regarded, I think almost until the time he died, which was about just a year before I qualified as a lawyer. So the sad thing was he never actually saw me qualify as a lawyer, but when I started my articles as a solicitor, he was disappointed that I'd chosen to go to what he regarded as a less noble profession than the bar, not realizing that actually in those days, and for a very, very long time after I qualified as a solicitor, the bar was a difficult place to make a living in. And if it was difficult for an Indian in the 1980s to succeed as a solicitor in the city, it was far more difficult to succeed as a barrister. And one certainly needed an independent income or a source of income that was not dependent on your success as a barrister, which I didn't have the benefit of. Yeah. So I had no real regrets about having chosen to do what I did once I had decided that that was the path I would follow. But for my grandfather, it was very different. I think he had notions of me becoming a bit like Rumpole of the Bailey or something similar. I think he watched too much Crown Court in the afternoons.
I think probably, yeah. I think that sometimes the impression of what a profession is based on, not always on the reality, isn't it, of things you've seen.
Yeah, it's very different. If you go back, I think to the to the Victorian times, there was always an expectation amongst middle class families that their children would become doctors, or they would become lawyers, or they'd go into the army or the clergy.
Yeah.
And it's the same with families who've emigrated to the UK. I did my articles in a firm which was founded by two very, very entrepreneurial brothers who were Jewish. And the vast majority, if not all of the partners in that firm were Jewish. And I remember them telling me that for them, the chosen path was always doctor, then accountant, then lawyer. Yeah. And those were the three things you did. I think for Asians and particularly Indians, law was actually the last thing that people considered. By nature, Indians and particularly Gujaratis, which is what I am, are very entrepreneurial. So I think Gujarati parents at the time, so you're talking about the 1970s and 80s, would have expected their children to go into accountancy, because that would then lead to some kind of success in industry. If not, then a doctor or a pharmacist, and law was unusual. So when I decided to become a lawyer at university, I think I was one of three people in the law faculty at my university when I started, and when I left, I don't think there were more than 10 people over that 3-year period who were of Asian origin or black origin. And then at law school, which is Guildford, in those days you only had 3 options because they were the Law Society's colleges of law, and Guildford was the easiest one for me to get to. I was one of probably 10 people doing what we call the Law Society finals in those days, or who were not white middle class. Yeah. So, that was, for me, it was quite a rude awakening, because you were suddenly in the midst of very, very bright and very able people, but you realized instantly that you were in a very small minority. Yeah. Because you were different from everyone else, and you hadn't come through a very traditional background of a private education, having been to Oxbridge or one of the Russell universities, and already had your articles or training contracts, as we call them now, lined up ahead of coming to the College of Law. So when I was at law school, I hadn't even secured my articles. And it was only fortuitous that I actually managed to get articles immediately after law school.
And when you qualified, did that continue, sort of that lack of, I guess, representation from South Asian?
Yeah, very much so. So in the firm that I trained, which at the time was the biggest law firm outside the city, so I think there was only one other lawyer who was of Asian origin. And at the time, so just rewinding back, the choice for me was either to get a training contract with a city law firm, which I had tried. I'd tried my best, but I had got used to, I think like a lot of people in those days, you would submit applications randomly, and I must have submitted, I don't know, 60, 70 applications, and you'd get used to the thud of rejection letters that came through the post every few days. And I think I secured one interview with a Silver Circle firm. And I knew within minutes of the interview starting that this was heading nowhere. And I think they were just going through the motions and felt that they needed to at least put up some semblance of having gone through a process with me. But from the moment you entered the building, you knew you didn't belong there, and no one actually tried to disabuse you of that notion. And the other option was to go to a smaller local firm, which may have been founded by lawyers of Asian origin, and I didn't want to do that. So I was really fortunate that I managed to get a training contract at Breaches, and despite the fact that I was the only articled clerk in my intake of Indian origin, the only other lawyer who was of Indian origin actually worked in a satellite office in West London, which has quite a vibrant Asian community in Southall, Ealing and Wembley, and he mainly did conveyancing. So really the only person there who did what I did was me. It was very much a question of swimming or sinking. You had to decide what you were doing, and I wasn't going to allow people to let me drown, so there was no option of sinking. I had to swim, and it didn't matter how strong the tide was against you, you just had to do it.
So I'm guessing when you were there weren't any senior role models that you could relate to, but did you have any?
Yeah, so the two people that stand out, my principal was a guy called Morris Fireman, and he had become a bit of a role model for me in the sense of how to overcome adversity. So that was a life lesson which I've never forgotten. And he encouraged me in every way he could. He took me to meetings. I learned how to sort of gain confidence in front of people that I wouldn't have done had it not been for Morris. And the other big role model for me at the time at Breaches was the head of their tax team, a guy called Stuart Lightman. And Stuart is the epitome of that successful professional, again, from a Jewish, but a middle-class Jewish background. He was a successful tax lawyer, despite the fact that he was a tax lawyer, is about one of the best corporate lawyers I ever came across. And he was the person who really, if I were to pick one person who made me want to become a corporate lawyer, it was him. And I learned a lot from him. And the biggest lesson I learned from him was to get out of the West End and get into the city. So out of the 10 or 11 people that qualified at the same time as I did, only 2 were offered a job. So I was one of them, and the offer was to work with Stuart in the tax team. And he said, don't do that and go somewhere else. And he tried his best to get me a job as an NQ in firms that he knew. So I interviewed with people like Linklaters. All these openings were in the tax team, and I wanted to do corporate work. So I eventually ended up in the London office of what is Hill Dickinson today, and I joined a fledgling corporate team that had been started by a partner called Carl Goldsmith, and he is the person who I really regard, apart from Morris and Stuart, and obviously my parents, and I'll come to that in a moment, as being the person who inspired me the most about how to succeed in law and how to sort of lead teams and how to lead people. So going back to my parents, I think given what I've said and the environment in which I was trying to build a career and succeed, it would have been very easy to give up. And the one thing that my parents instilled and it's really been the constant in my professional life. It's been my parents and subsequently my mother, because my father passed away many years ago, is never to give up. And that has helped me considerably. So if you're looking at mentors, there is no one better than my parents, but professional mentors, Carl was probably the person who's had the most profound effect on me. Yeah. So I qualified in the mid-80s, joined Hill Dickinson. At the time, the mid-80s was a bit of a difficult period. You went to an interview and they'd say, well, what's your experience? And you say, just qualifying. And they said, no, we're not looking for that. So unless someone took you on, you wouldn't get the experience, but no one was willing to take you on because you didn't have the experience. Carl, after my first interview with him, and they were looking for a 2-3 year qualified lawyer to join their venture capital team. And the partner who I was going to work for was looking for a 2 or 3 year qualified lawyer. Carl somehow persuaded the firm to take me on and actually persevered. He taught me all of the basics of venture capital law, but more importantly, what he did, which I would not have survived and would not have thrived without, is the confidence to be myself in an environment where there's a sea of faces which are very different from me, and not sort of compromising my heritage or integrity in any way, but actually equipping me with the skills that I needed to succeed in that environment. And I've never forgotten that. Carl died about 12 years ago, and even after he retired, I continued to have a very, very strong and healthy relationship with him, and until a few years ago with most of his family, so with his wife and his daughters. So it was really, from my perspective, the best grounding that I could have had. He was a mentor, he was a benefactor, because he always had my interests at heart.
It's amazing. Sounds like he was a good mix of a mentor and a sponsor as well, yes, with that actively sort of giving you opportunities to learn. When you look back, was partnership always the end goal for you?
I think for all of us at the time, and I think even today, it's the holy grail, right? So you want to become a partner because that's what you entered the profession for. And there are different reasons. In my case, it was never the money that motivated me to become a partner. It was the fact that in order to demonstrate that I had succeeded, I needed to have the badge of a partner. And I became a partner in 1989. I was amongst, I think, the 2 youngest partners in the London office of Hill Dickinson. So I would have become a partner, I think, 5 years after I qualified. But a lot of that was due to the work that Carl had been doing with me from a very young age. You can't suddenly say to someone at 7 years, well, you're going to be a partner in 2 years, and you now need to develop all these skills, and they need to be developing them. But more importantly, as partners in the business, partners need to be helping them develop those skills from day one, because it's not something you pick up overnight, and it's an evolutionary process, and it happens over a period of time. You learn by mistakes, you learn by your successes, and eventually you end up having all of the skills and all of the characteristics that we look for when we're looking at who might be a partner in 2 years' time.
It's a very good point, because you do need to, it's that constant sort of learning, development, opportunities that need to happen to get you to that point. So you've been a partner for a fair few years.
a long time. I think I have people working in the team today who weren't even born when I became a partner at Hill Dickinson.
And I'm just interested whether that sort of role of a partner, whether you've seen a change in what that looks like over the time that you've been partners at different firms.
I think if there is one big distinction between when I became a partner and what partnership is today, is that quite rightly law firms are seen as businesses. We are a business, and ultimately we owe it to the rest of the partnership for the business to be as successful as it can be. And because of that, there is a pressure today to justify your position as a partner and demonstrate the financial as well as the more non-financial contribution that you're making. And the financial aspect of it was probably not as profound as it is today. I think the other change is that as law firms have become much bigger. So when I became a partner at Hill Dickinson, the total partnership could not have been more than about 35 partners. When I joined Lawrence Graham at the end of the 20th century, which does sound like it was a long time ago, I was amazed by how big Lawrence Graham was. At Hill Dickinson, I knew everyone from the doorman through to the senior partner, and with you knew everyone well enough to recognize them in whatever environment they were in. I struggled for the first few years at Lawrence Graham. I'd bump into people on the road and subsequently realize, maybe a week later when you were at a partner's lunch, that the person you'd bumped into on the Strand the other day was one of your partners.
Yeah.
So that was the sort of stark contrast. And then you look at our business today, and we have 1,500 people in our 2 offices. So if you look at relative sizes, it's completely different.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of, in my mind, there's always been a sort of dilemma about, as you become bigger and bigger, how much wedded are you into the business as an institutional organization, and the constant challenge of having to remind ourselves that the business succeeds because of collegiality and collaboration between all of us, as opposed to just being individual practitioners. So as opposed to working in silos, working in teams, and how together we can benefit more than any of us can individually.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and it's one I've talked about in the past as well. It is that thing that we all need to be together to be the most successful. And you're right, with that growth, it then takes some time to sort of readjust or to look at how can we make this work in the best way. You mentioned earlier, Sunil, that you've been with the firm since the end of the last century.
Yes.
Firstly as part of Lawrence Graham, then RAG Lawrence Graham, and now Gowling WLG. I'm just interested in what changes, if any, you've seen in the firm over that time.
And we're obviously much bigger than we are now, and I would have said more international, which we are. We didn't have 8 offices and 700 lawyers in Canada back in 2015, whereas since 2016 we've had that. I think for me the changes are more about what we offer to our clients. So as Lawrence Graham, we had our limitations, and we were best known for a number of things we did. A very, very strong looking at at it from my perspective, capital markets and investment funds practice a very strong real estate practice. So, if you ask people in the city, which Lawrence Graham was almost a 300-year-old brand when it merged with Rag & Co. And you ask people, and that's the 2 or 3 things that would spring to their mind would be real estate or capital markets or investment funds, and actually private wealth, because we had one of the biggest and probably the most prestigious private wealth practice in certainly in the UK, but amongst the top in Europe. I think what we've gained as a result of the mergers is a platform that is more full service and caters to a wider range of clients, a strength and depth in our areas where we were already known or famous for. So real estate being an obvious example, where the merger of the 2 real estate firms has created a very, very significant real estate practice in the UK, and then allowed the firm to strengthen its international footprint. So if you look back at the time of the merger, we had a relatively small office, or Lawrence Graham had a relatively small office in Dubai, a small office in Singapore, and a small office in Monaco, which we subsequently shut down when the private wealth team left us. Rag & Co. had a big office in Paris, a small presence in Germany, a small office in Abu Dhabi, which it was in the process of closing down, and a small office in China. If you look at what we are today, and internationally we are a stronger business than we were. And obviously the addition of Canada has given us a very significant North American presence and very significantly strengthened our US sales initiative. So I think there are lots of positives flowing from it.
We're going to take a short break now, and when we're back, we'll find out more about some of Sunil's other roles at Gowling WLG and what advice he'd give people at the start of their careers. Welcome back to part 2. We're going to kick off now, Sunil, with some quick fire questions to get to know you a little bit more. So, some general questions. What was your first job?
I worked in a old style castings factory when I was 14. So my first summer job was in the days when people made castings for spare parts, and my job was to wear some very heavy duty gloves and break the castings into individual components. And I was relieved when the 3 weeks ended that I'd signed up for. The important lesson I learned from that was find something else that you enjoyed doing. But more importantly, what you learned was it was about perseverance.
Is your bed made right now?
Yes. One of the things like today, I had to rush because I had a call at 10:30, and I still made up my bed because it's something I've always done, and I feel a bit, it stresses me out to think that I go home and I have to make up my bed, or even worse, my wife has had to make the bed and reminds me about it when we're having dinner.
What is your favourite movie?
My favourite movie? The one that I keep on watching over and over again and never get tired of is the Shawshank Redemption.
Good choice. I like that. I haven't watched that in a while. I might watch that again. What's your dream holiday destination?
Always a beach. Somewhere.
Any particular beach, or are you not fussy?
I preferably somewhere in Southeast Asia.
And what is your go-to karaoke song?
I haven't got one. I hate karaoke.
Really?
Yeah. And I cringe at the thought if people, if we go anywhere and there's karaoke, I find an excuse to leave before it starts.
So your idea with Hal would be like karaoke party and someone having put your name in for a song.
I had to do one with clients a while back. We went to the, it was a skyscraper. I'm fairly sure it was in Malaysia, in KL. Went to the top of a skyscraper and in like this private karaoke room. And everyone had to sing. And that was one place that I couldn't make a quick exit.
Did you sing?
I had to sing.
Do you remember what song?
I can't remember it. It was
You
so bad
blocked it
that
out.
I blocked it out of my mind.
A few more silly questions. These are either or questions, so you just need to tell me which one. Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Would you rather fly or have super strength?
Fly.
Are you more introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert.
A night out or a night in?
Night in.
Would you rather travel to the past or to the future?
Future.
So you mentioned earlier that you're part of the UK leadership team now in your current role and also a member of the international board. Just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about what that means.
So I joined the international board just over 2 years ago in the midst of the pandemic. So the meetings were all by Zoom, and the first physical meeting we had was just over a year ago, I think in April 2022, shortly before I retired as a partner. And I'd always wanted to do that role because I'm very, very keen and passionate about the development of our international footprint, and I believe that being on the international board would help me articulate and strengthen our resolve to expand internationally. And that's been something that's been a recurring theme in what I've been doing. David asked me to join the leadership team after I retired as a partner, and that is more about sort of strategic thinking about the direction in which the firm develops, so working very closely with our executive board and our own team, the operational management team. So that is really sort of looking at emerging themes that might benefit our business. Examples are like AI is very topical at the moment. How are we addressing the challenge that AI places on our business? Is it something that we want to do, something we should be doing? Similarly, our resources in the way in which we expand are limited. We haven't got an endless stream of revenue, or there isn't a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So we have to be, how do we prioritize what we're doing in terms of growth, both domestically as well as internationally?
You're also one of the board sponsors for our Embrace Network, and you've done that role, I think, for a couple of years now.
Yes, I've really enjoyed it. I think I would love to devote more time to it, and with everything else that I do, I can't. But I think the role is more about providing support to our two very good chairpersons, and obviously you and the rest of the D&I team, and acting as a voice for them, both at board level and at leadership level, and making sure that the network remains both important and relevant to our business, but has a strong voice around the boardroom table.
Yeah, and why do you think it's important to have that board level support of the networks?
I think we need, with any of our networks, unless we've got buy-in at leadership level, with those initiatives, it's difficult to see how they will be successful. And this is not about the board supporting everything and anything we do, but it's the knowledge amongst the network that the board endorses what the network is doing, is willing to provide the support that it needs to thrive as a network for its membership. And overall, I think it is important for our business to be as diverse as possible, and this is not just about ethnic diversity or gender diversity. I think the business needs to be sufficiently open so that it embraces people from all walks of life.
What are some of the deals or the big pieces of work that you've worked on that really stick in your head, and sort of the things that you'll continue to look back on and just be like, wow, that was amazing?
So there are several, because obviously we're a sort of 40-year span. It's difficult to say that there's one deal, but if I look at it, maybe go backwards in time from when I retired as a partner, probably the recent deal that stands out for me is we won a hotly contested beauty parade to act for the IPO of Codemasters, which is one of Britain's leading video games developers, and the company that's behind the very successful Formula One video game franchise. It was the biggest AIM IPO of that year and one of the most successful IPOs in recent history. We subsequently, so the team was me, Sam Myers, and a couple of associates in our business at the time, so we did that IPO, and then about a year later did a very big acquisition for them of one of their competitors, along with quite a big fundraising, and we thought that we would be on a bit of a roll with that, but interestingly, with the development of Meta, suddenly video games businesses became flavor of the month, and to cut a long story short, we acted for Codemasters when it was taken over in a contested bid, ultimately by Electronic Arts, and that was £1 billion+ deal that we did virtually, and all of us, everyone working on the team, it was me, Sam, Jeff Elway, several other sort of partners supporting different specialist areas, the advisors on our side, the advisors on the other side, all working remotely. I would never have imagined back in 2018 when we listed Codemasters that we'd ever be able to do something like that without everyone sitting in the office for 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, and yet we managed to do that. And then going back a bit further, probably one of the most memorable deals I've done is in the early 90s, because Hill Dickinson had such a strong shipping, trade and commodities business. I was asked by an Italian sort of ship-owning family to help them save. So they had invested in a luxury mini cruise liner business which was about to go under, and they asked me to, along with others, to help save that business from going into insolvency. I was told to go to Genoa for what was a 2-day meeting, and over the course of the next 3 months I ended up spending almost 2.5 months on and off in Genoa. But the first 2 days that I went there, so and I remember what exactly the date it was, because it was that they wanted me to go out on the 4th of July, but because the patriarch in the Italian family was in New York celebrating Independence Day, he he was flying back on the 5th via the UK, and he picked me up in his private jet. We went to Genoa. So a memorable 2.5 months in the stifling summer that Genoa can often become.
And what's it like? Because I know it can be really full on when you're sort of leading up to these deals. What's the feeling like when it's all done? It's all sort of finished over the line.
It's a combination of relief and very anticlimactic. You're working up to this great objective of closing the deal, and you're typically at the end of each deal, you're starved of sleep. You haven't actually eaten very well because you're working from the office, and you end up eating fast food. In my case, it almost invariably ended up being pizzas late at night. And the only thing you're looking forward to is finishing the deal, having a celebratory drink with the team.
Yeah. I've got a couple more questions. I was interested to know what advice you'd give people that are early on in their careers at the moment.
I think the most important thing, and based on my own experience, is learn to be yourself. Don't try to be something that you're not. Never be afraid of asking a question. I think people often in our position, people feel embarrassed about asking questions because they feel that it may come across as being unknowledgeable. You might appear to be stupid, but there's no such thing as a stupid question. It's better to ask one and be told an answer that may be obvious than not ask it and then keep on wondering what the answer to it should be. I think cultivating relationships where you have, going back to what I was saying earlier, a sponsor or a benefactor is very important. And I think something that I don't think people do enough of is learning by observation. Sort of learning to, learning by how other people deal with clients, how they are on the phone. One of the things that I find quite disturbing these days is the unwillingness of, and not just our lawyers, but I think it is a generational thing. We've moved into an era where everyone really communicates by WhatsApp, or if they're like me, they still use texts. And this unwillingness to actually use the phone for what it is, which is actually to speak to people. And I think you can achieve so much more by just mustering up the courage, picking up the phone and speaking. And more importantly than all of that, it's actually admitting when you're out of your depth and you need help or support. Again, I think as professionals we feel that we should know everything and we shouldn't be asking for guidance. I'm in my 60s and it never ceases to amaze me that there are things I still need to ask my colleagues about, and I'll be the more knowledgeable as a result of that.
And if we're thinking about people at our firm or other firms that are more senior, maybe they're partners already, but they have ambitions for leadership roles, to be on the board one day, what are the things that they should be thinking about to be in a good position to do this or to achieve this?
I think the first thing is to actually say you want to do it. Quite a few, and I'm a good example of it. We stumble into these roles by accident. It's very rarely by design. I don't know if that many people who sort of decided when they were junior partners that they'd like to be managing partner or a practice group leader or a team leader. And the second part of that is ask for help and support. You have these phrases about leaders are not born, they're made, and all those sort of cliches, and they may be cliches, but they're true. Good leaders become good leaders because they've had the training and the guidance to do that. So I think the first thing is to actually, if you have leadership ambitions, to make that clear. You know, what is it that you want to do over what period of time, and what support you think you'll need to get there.
And then my final question to you is, what's the best thing that's happened to you this week?
This week, actually having lunch with my son and daughter, and being able to spend a couple of hours with them. They both have demanding jobs. My son's a lawyer, so actually being able to spend 2.5 hours with them, not talking about what I did at work or what either of them do at work, and just having a relaxed moment with them.
It's priceless being able to spend time with your kids as well and have that time. Well, a huge thanks, Sunil, for joining us today and for sharing your story and some good insights and advice. We'll be back next week to get to know more talented people at Gowling WLG. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful week, and remember, we all have the power to make a difference.